Hello students, so today I am going to discuss about the topic known as group or aggregate functions used in MySQL. So what are the group or aggregate functions? MySQL provides a set of functions which work on a group of rows. Now if you see this particular table, it consists of 5 different rows. This highlighted region is the first row, this is the second row, this is the third row, this is the fourth row, and this is the fifth row. Now if all these rows are grouped together like this, you can perform a set of functions on these rows. In MySQL, these functions which can be applied on these group of rows are known as the group or aggregate functions. These grouping functions can take the data of multiple rows as input, perform the aggregation on them, and then produce a single output. So it can take data of multiple rows as input. It can be either these 3 rows, it can be either these 2 rows, or else it can be either these 3 rows. It can be the entire set of rows which can be taken as inputs by those grouping functions. Once the set of rows are taken as inputs, MySQL performs aggregation on them. That means they shall be grouped together, and from there a single output shall be produced. Now if you look at this slide, based on this table identified by the name purchase, these 5 set of rows are grouped together, and a grouping function called count has been applied on the column named SID, that is this particular column. Let me highlight it. So this is the one, okay, and these are its elements. So once the grouping function has been performed on the column SID, a single output has been produced as indicated here, and this is the result. Now these are the list of grouping functions available in MySQL. The first one is the grouping function named sum. Its purpose is to find the sum of numeric values on a set of rows. The second one is the grouping function named count. Its purpose is to count the number of rows. The third one is the grouping function named max. Its purpose is to return the maximum value, or you can say to return the largest value from a given set of rows. Now the next type of grouping function is min. Its purpose is to return the minimum value, or you can say to return the smallest value from a given set of rows. And the last grouping function is average. Its function is to calculate and return the average of numeric values from a set of rows. Now I shall be explaining you each of them one by one with the help of an example in the next slide. Now consider this particular table identified by the name purchase. Okay, it has 4 columns, namely SID, DNAME, QTY, and PUR date. Okay, where SID denotes the student ID, DNAME denotes the device name, QTY denotes the quantity, and PUR date denotes the purchase date of this particular device. Now based on this table, there is a question below. The question is asking us to write a query to display the total number of students who have purchased the device from the store. Now if you need to find the total number of students from this table purchase, okay, who have purchased the device from the store, you have to look for this SID column, okay, which is the student ID. Okay, now see its entries. The entry S10 is occurring once. Okay, so the number of students we have is 1 now. The entry S20 is also occurring once, so as of now we have 2 students. Then we have the entry S30 occurring once. As of now we have 3 students. Then we have the entry S40. Okay, but this is occurring twice. But if you see here, S40 is just a student ID. That means this is the ID of one particular student. That means the SID entry S40 denotes the student ID of a particular student only. So in total, how many students do we have? What is the total number of students who have purchased the device from the store? The answer is 4, because we have 4 distinct student IDs, okay, namely S10, S20, S30 and S40. The student ID S40 at the end will not be taken into account, because if we have to find the total number of students who have purchased the device, we can't take duplicate entries of that student ID. Duplicate entries should be eliminated. Okay, so only one entry of S40 shall be taken. As a result, we have 4 distinct entries of student ID after eliminating the duplicate one. And for that I have to write the query as select, and then I shall apply the count function, okay, which is a type of grouping function. Now this grouping function count shall be applied on a set of rows, and that is determined by distinct SID. So when we say distinct SID, I am taking this set of rows, eliminating the duplicate entry of S40. So distinct SID returns this set of rows, and if I apply this count function on this set of rows, then it is going to count the number of rows on this highlighted section, and if you count it, okay, it will return 4, because there are in total 4 number of rows, and that's why I get to see the output as 4. Now note that the column name against this output value 4 is total student. But why is this appearing? Why not this grouping function itself, that is count of distinct SID? That's because I have renamed this grouping function count into total student, like this. So you get to see total student as the output column instead of this grouping function count. But if you want to see this as the output column over here, then simply delete this total student from here, and after doing that, you can see this grouping function count appearing exactly like this in the output. But as of now, let's rename this to total student. So for this, I have to rename this grouping function count into total student in the query also. So because I have renamed this grouping function count into total student, that's why I get to see this column name as total student in the output instead of the grouping function count of distinct SID. And its value is 4 because I have selected the distinct SID, okay, which returns all these 4 set of rows excluding the duplicate entry of S40. And if I perform the grouping function count on it, okay, it shall return 4 because there are 4 entries of SID. Now look at this particular question. It says write a query in MySQL to display the total quantity of devices purchased in the store. Now if I happen to find out the total quantity of devices purchased in the store, I have to refer to this particular column known as QTY. Okay, and if I see, these are its entries. Okay, now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to find this sum of all these entries. Okay, or I'm going to add up all these entries, and that will only give me the total quantity of devices purchased. Okay, now at first 5 quantities of the device pen drive has been purchased on this date. Then 2 quantities of the same device pen drive has been purchased on this date. Then 3 quantities of the device RAM has been purchased on this date, followed by 1 and 10 quantities of the device CD-ROM being purchased on these 2 different dates. Okay, so if I have to find the total quantity of devices, I have to find the sum of all these quantities. Okay, or I have to add up all these quantities, and this will give me 5 plus 2 is 7, 7 plus 3 is 10, 10 plus 1 is 11, 11 plus 10 is 21. Okay, so I get to see the result as 21 in the output, and the query that I have to write for that is this. Okay, I start with select and then use the grouping function sum on the column QTY. Okay, so sum of QTY is going to sum up all these entries of this column QTY. Okay, that is, it's going to add up all these entries for this column QTY. So sum of QTY is going to give the value 21 in the output, which is the result after adding all these entries in the QTY column. Now let's say I want to rename this grouping function sum that has been applied on the column QTY so that it appears in the output like this, total underscore QTY. And for that, just after supplying this grouping function sum of QTY, I have to give the rename text, which is total underscore QTY. And it is for this reason, instead of seeing this grouping function, that is sum of QTY, appearing in the output column, I get to see the rename text total underscore QTY appearing in the output column. Now look at the third question. It says write a query in MySQL to display the minimum quantity of devices purchased in the store. Now again, I am referring to the quantity of devices purchased, which is represented by this column QTY. Okay, and these are its entries. Now if I happen to find the minimum quantity of devices, okay, I have to find the minimum value out of all these values, or I have to find the minimum entry out of all these entries. Now which is the minimum out of all these? Remember, minimum is the smallest value. Okay, so smallest value out of all these values is 1. Okay, so the minimum quantity of devices purchased is 1. Now as I haven't renamed this grouping function min of QTY, so I get to see this appearing the same in the output column. Now read the next question. It says write a query in MySQL to display the maximum quantity of devices purchased in the store. Again, I am referring to the quantity of devices, so this is the QTY column, and if I have to find the maximum quantity of devices purchased, okay, out of all these entries, I have to find the maximum value, and obviously the maximum value is 10. Okay, so the maximum quantity of devices purchased from the store will be 10. And the SQL statement to represent that shall be select max of QTY, okay, where max is the grouping function to be applied on this column named QTY, and the output shall return 10. Now since I haven't renamed this grouping function max that was applied on the column QTY, so I get to see this appearing the same in the output column. Now this is the last question, which says write a query in MySQL to display the average of the marks secured by the student in all the subjects. Okay, now I'm referring to which particular column? Since I have to display the average of the marks secured by the student, so I have to refer to this marks column. Okay, so let me highlight it. I am referring to this marks column, and these are all the entries under the marks column for the table identified by the name student report. Now since I have to find out the average of all these marks, so before finding the average I need to find the sum of all these marks, okay, because average is equal to the sum of all the entries divided by the total number of entries. Okay, so at first let me find the sum of all the entries. So sum of all the entries under the marks column shall be 50 plus 70. Okay, if you do 50 plus 70 it comes to 120. 120 plus 30 it comes to 150. 150 plus 40 190. 190 plus 40 230. Okay, so sum of all the entries under the marks column gives the value 230. So as the average is equal to sum of all the entries divided by the number of entries, so the sum of all the entries is represented as sum of marks. Why sum of marks? Because I am performing the aggregate or the grouping function sum only on the entries in the marks column. Okay, I am finding the sum of all the entries that is belonging to this marks column. Okay, and that gives the value 230. So sum of marks gives 230 divided by the total number of entries, and that is represented by the grouping function count to be applied on the column marks. Okay, so the total number of entries is represented by count of marks. So the count function after being applied on this column marks is going to give us the total number of these entries, and the total number of these entries comes to 5. Okay, because there are 5 such entries. Okay, 50, 70, 30, 40 and 40. Okay, 5 such entries. Note that I haven't written it as count of distinct marks, okay, because I'm not taking the distinct entries of the marks column. As a result, the duplicate entries shall not be eliminated. We have to include this duplicate entry as well, because the first marks 40 belongs to the subject economics and the second marks 40 belongs to the subject informatics. So in this case we have to take these duplicate entries. Okay, so I shall be performing the aggregate function or the grouping function count not on distinct marks but on the marks column itself. Okay, and that count shows the result as 5 because there are 5 such entries. So count of marks will show 5 here. This gives sum of marks divided by count of marks, okay, producing 230 divided by 5, and that gives the result as 46. And so I get to see 46 as the result under the output column average of QTY. Sorry, it should be average of marks. Okay, let me change it. Okay, average of marks. Now see, if you look here, the same grouping function average of marks, okay, I was able to view it in the output column. This is because I haven't renamed this grouping function average that was applied on the column marks in this SQL statement. So that's all for today. With this I end my presentation here.